Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 27th. Look at that rally continues here from our early setup. This actually, if you look at it without the GAM function, I can put that chart up on the daily. You get the GAM right there. And it actually bought an ATR bust. And that's an interesting one to see on a daily. Haven't seen that. It only occurs when the ATR is in excess, so that's an unusual one to see. It's an optional one on the MBI Opus because, it expects big volatility built into it. So you can see we had the crossover a while back here that led to the start of this, and the point was, though, that once we started to see the dip of the steel back below, we would see some weakness if the green did not cross over. The green crossed over, and look at the shorts have completely faded out of this. So we haven't had shorts in this setup since we got down here at the bottom. They started liquidating right when it got back to the 0 point right here, right pretty much when I was finalizing those short trades and flipping to long plays as well. And once we got above the 23%, like I said, hey, sky's the limit. Then made to 25.05, and we pretty much stayed above that early on. The boost of money that just flew into the market was staggering. So it's interesting to even have a retrace when you're thinking about being here at 2,600 while it's not up at the 33. When you're at 33, you had a country that was running on all cylinders, and now you've got maybe one or two cylinders at best, if you can even say that. We're pretty much not even functioning as an economic power any longer. The NQ, likewise, all the way up to the 38%, so that becomes an interesting one for the NASDAQ here because you get the 38 to play off of, so that's a bit more helpful. And it's also been stronger. It led the charge, and it's kind of evening out. You can see that the S&P move is much bigger because the 2635 is literally right on the 38%. I put up the range there. 37 is the 38% Morganacci line. Worth noting. Euro, and again, the Eurozone is completely shot, but again, central banks, the Fed is supplying them unlimited amount of resources, basically to, pretend to sell dollars into it to lift the euro up because it's the only way to help stabilize their banks in it because they are pretty much gone. History in the toilet. Excuse the French there, but the merde. USO oil, again, is going to remain. What are you going to do with all that supply? Nobody knows. I mean, the U.S. is going to try and buy up a bunch for the reserve. But like they said, even if Russia and Saudi Arabia stopped producing oil now, that would just be enough to not have the glut be so large that you can't store it. Because at a certain point, you literally have to shut the pumps off. They don't want to do that because it's a pain to try and restart them. But where are you going to put the stuff? I mean, they're producing X millions of barrels a day that have no use. Who would have thought that, from the oil crunch era and everything else. And boy, isn't it a beautiful thing for the environment? Oh, if you see the pictures out of the Venice canals and that, they're just absolutely stunning how pristine everything is. The air quality is so fantastic around the world now. What a nice hiatus for Mother Earth. Anyway, gold. Right back up here at the peaks, cyan under red is always a buy. There's never been any question about that one. And gave the exact correct signal time to buy from a daily standpoint. It showed up even earlier in the intraday charts. This is the ending chart of the 5K as it is right now. I've been following this one. If we go all the way back, we can see that big giant jump at the start of the day that just really caused this whole thing to take off. Right here, we started off a little bit of softness, kept getting weak, but we noticed here that the DOC reds, every time they got into the oversold, they were being bought back up, and then boom, right at the beginning of this, you have the little dark color there, which is an indication of cyan under red. Started the charge, came up briefly for a moment, but we had positive shakeout at that time and growing with the yellow shakeout right down here. well over the magenta, and boom, that just escalated. And once it got midway into it, you get the P2s along with rising gold, and boy, that led to it. Now, sure, you get these little breaks of the ABM. I'm always looking for those under conditions where you're not looking at still magenta and that over plus 13. Now, the time it breaks down above it, you've already started a return of your shakeout rising, and that led to the next wave, which, interestingly enough, right at the previous reset resistance numbers, the 2519, and we had the higher one from above. Those were previous algo levels for positive extremes that needed to be retraced, and we pretty much stayed right along that line for quite a bit of the time, and then just briefly broke down below it. Really wasn't much of a move. It looks more dramatic when you get closer to it, and still, but when you think about it, it's still plenty of points. I mean, this is the thing where you can have an up day like this and you know that you're going to finish towards the highs, if not better than that. But when you're still looking at it, going from 83 to 46, you can still capture 40 points on the downside move is pretty impressive from that standpoint. But every time we got back above the ABM yellow, we pretty much stayed with it, and then as we came towards the end of the day, had a nice little dip where we came below the red line, and it actually did the same on the second half of it right here, which started to produce the dots. And then immediately you had your, basically from a candlestick pattern, rising 3 methods that then fell down, and that literally produced the blue candle buy set up there, and boom, you had your P2 in that right before the end, and then there was this shock wave. There was an imbalance in the market of about 7 billion or so, and that forced futures to catch up to it. That's what happens when you have free helicopter money. We saw this happen back when the Fed was making its interventions after 2009, when they started to actively buy mortgages and things like that, because it creates these kind of mismatches between market and what futures are doing, and you get these kind of pop situations. But it is positive extreme from right there. Remember to point this one out. And so that value of 25.69 will get revisited when there's a significant sell configuration within that. Most likely we'll see it from a 50K starting to roll over, and who knows, they may even try to do it overnight. I would doubt it. I would think that they're going to try and continue to push. We weren't seeing much from a short interest yet, so they may be looking for a little bit higher to jump in and just attack it for another wave down. But when you have this kind of money, rule one, we always say never fight the Fed, and the Fed is the king. They're going to pick and choose their times. As long as they can keep it up in these ranges, it's pretty healthy from a market standpoint. Nothing to get upset. When we were talking about, breaking down below that 23.90, we didn't really have anything much below that. So the little downdraft that took place on the daily from there popped right back up. And as long as they can keep it anywhere in these ranges while there's still nothing happening, bravo. They've done a good job, because I think it's pretty clear that there just isn't going to be the earnings and anything from any of the major companies. It's hard to imagine who's going to post any EPS that's justifiable, which just only means that the market valuation, as far as market multiplier, is going to skyrocket, because your earnings per share are going to be dreadful, even with the bailout situations and that. Now, if things start to end quick, you're going to have Americans with a little bit of money, which, hey, they might be able to use. It's going to be a couple thousand for families and 1,200 or so for individuals, not to mention, depends on what the terms and rules on all of the business loans and things like that will be. The interesting one for me is what's going to happen on the debt side of things. How are credit card companies going to be treating individuals and things like that? That's really going to matter the most. The same with mortgages and rents, because that's where the big disruption is and where people are probably going to get squeezed the most. So we'll see how that begins to play out. I think that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks if this continues to drag on. We know by then we should have an idea whether the therapy that Trump was touting, if that worked, that would certainly make a huge dent in what people can and can't do. And I think that we talked about that in our Skype chat, that would certainly move the market from a stability standpoint, because that would mean that you wouldn't necessarily have to have a quarantine if hospitals aren't going to be inundated. That's really the point behind the quarantine. They're really not terrified of everybody getting the illness. It's about overwhelming your hospitals, and if you can reduce the number of people that have to stay in the hospital because you can give them a 5 or 6 day therapy, it's going to really reduce symptoms, and that immediately that will dramatically change the way this all looks. And I think you would see probably a significant rally, even if it's going to take quite a while for businesses to ramp back up and everything. But there's going to be a decent pent-up demand for a lot of different things. The question will then become on travel and other things like that, how it will work. So a lot of unknowns still. But the market's going to keep giving us those signals ahead of time, so we'll just take it as it comes. As always, though, I will be putting up relevant charts in the Skype chat, making excellent progress with our, oops, too far on that one. I think it was this one. I have my conversion chart that I'm working with. No, not that one. It's the one that's converting all of the functions to create the various signals to make additional programs super simple. So if we can finalize some of those where it's starting to show the different colored setups from the magenta ones, also the blue line candles over here, and been working with the yellow. What it will do for us is when we get the bisignals that have all the right configurations, then I can convert the ABM resets to those so that they'll be really consistent with the paint bar colors. So that's one of the exciting things that I think is going to go through probably another day or so, because I think I've done half a dozen of them now, so making good progress with it. As always, though, we'll be on the Skype chat. Trade well. We'll talk again later.